You all know, coming in today, it's difficult movement around the city as we prepare for the St. Patrick's Day parade. But as you probably also know, this is not the largest St. Patrick's Day parade. That will be in New York City. And there are parades and celebrations of Patrick all over the world. I was shocked to find that one of the largest parades is in the Caribbean. But that Patrick and the impact of the Irish around the world over the last several hundred years, Patrick is celebrated everywhere. And we know all the numbers that before the famine in Ireland, there were 8.5 million people. We just broke 5 million in the most recent census, the first time since the 1840s. But that around the world, over 80 million people count Irish heritage. In the United States, over 36 million claim that their principal, their primary ethnic identity is Irish. Many, many times this island. And those numbers are important because when we celebrate St. Patrick, in many ways, we celebrate Irishness. But we also have to keep in mind that when we celebrate Irishness, we in many ways are celebrating the work and the success of Patrick. We can't ever let go of the fact, and in a modern world that is so divisive and harsh to one another, that Patrick himself was an immigrant. Patrick himself, before being an immigrant, was a slave, a victim of work-based slavery. Brought here from somewhere in Britain, Wales likely, maybe England, as a boy. And while here, and slaving away as a shepherd on the hillside in cold and freezing nights, he got through it all on faith. And you don't have to take my word for it, that you can take his word for it. Reading the Confessions, it's clear. He prayed night and day to a God he was somewhat indifferent to until he was taken slave. He would have been the son of a priest in the Christian tradition, but he himself says they drifted from their practice of the faith. But when he was on those cold and lonely nights, he prayed all day and he prayed all night, and he developed a deep trust in the God who was getting him through. And when he effected his escape, when he ran to a boat and went back home, he was at home. He was with his wealthy patrician family. When he heard the voice of Ireland, he heard the voice of the people he had lived with, calling him back, asking him to come and teach them his faith. And it was with a trust in God and a deep belief in divine providence and God's desire to guide our lives. He became a priest and then a bishop and came back. And in many ways conquered the Irish. We have to give up our false notions of what that looked like. For if you read his own descriptions and you understand what Ireland looked like in the day, it was not in any sense Europe. It was a Celtic people. They were tribal communities, family units. And Patrick used his skill as a speaker and a preacher, and he used his innate capacity to understand this people, to develop friendships and relationships, and would make a family unit Christian, and then use their help to move to the next one. And it was slowly but steadily across the whole island. Though not the first missionary here, across the whole island, he helped to spread this faith, which the native Irish people took to. We know this story, and that in doing so, he helped create education, he helped create cities and towns where monasteries were formed, and that the Ireland we know today is in many ways entirely dependent on those early efforts of Patrick and those men and women who followed his lead to become missionaries of Christ. So in bringing Christ, he brought a new way of being, created new patterns for life here in Ireland. And we know that all around the world, missionaries in the spirit of Patrick brought the faith to countries in Africa and Central America and South America and to the United States, especially on the East Coast, on the West Coast, to Canada, in Africa and Asia. Everywhere there were people, there were Irish missionaries. In the modern parlance of the church, we're all called to be missionaries. And the deepest goal of the church is that each one of us, once we've been evangelized and catechized, will see that place in our lives, those people in our lives we're called to be missionaries to. We're all called to be missionary disciples, to take up the call as we hear it, perhaps as a voice in our dreams as Patrick, or in just simply seeing a need in our world. And that we as faithful Christians, as followers of Jesus and sons and daughters of Patrick, will recognize that the glaring need will be met by no one but me, no one but us. And so today, as we celebrate our Irishness, as we celebrate our roots in the great St. Patrick, whose image adorns our wall, whose image is all over this country, may we find his image in our heart, a faithful follower of Christ, who has a desire to bring that faith, to bring the relationship which is the Holy Trinity, to bring our connection which is fostered by the Eucharist to every encounter, to every situation in which we find ourselves, that the work of St. Patrick might continue each and every day through us.